Ark of the Covenant is just a fable. Well, if it was just a fable made up centuries later by Israelites living in another land, why would they fashion their Ark of the Covenant to look almost identical to furniture found in King Tut's tomb? How would they even know what that looked like?
Exactly.
It's remarkable. Golden covered, and of course you're not supposed to open the Ark of the Covenant, but in there would have been the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments given by Moses. You know, people think...
God to Moses.
God to Moses. People think, well, 10 Commandments must have been 5 written on one tablet and 5 on the other. Actually, not likely. It's likely that all 10 were written on each tablet. Because this was a covenant, and a covenant is a legal agreement. It's a contract. This was a contract between God and the people of Israel, and you have to have 2 copies, just like in a modern contract.
What is
God's copy, the people's copy.
What is it about the Ark, Kitty, where they say that if you do open it, you could be killed? It's like some burst of some energy or something. What is that all about?
Well, the Ark was said to have brought victory in battle to the Israelites. And indeed, the Ark accompanied the Israelites across the Sinai and into the Promised Land during the conquest of the land under Joshua. Ultimately, it was captured by the Philistines in one of the subsequent battles. And the Philistines discovered that the Ark brought upon them horrible plagues, so much so that they said, we can't handle this anymore, we're sending it back to you. So there was some kind of awesome power, that accompanied the Ark, according to the Bible at least. They sent it back to the Israelites to a place called Kiryat Yearim, where it stayed for a very long time, apparently, after the Philistines sent it back. Well, archaeologists have actually been digging in Kiryat Yearim, looking for any traces of it. Nothing.
No.
But they did find ancient shrine there, like an ancient temple, where such a thing might in fact have been held until such time as it was brought up to the temple in Jerusalem. First, it was brought up by King David to Jerusalem. Then Solomon, the great King Solomon, built a temple where the Ark was housed. And then mysteriously, it disappears from the narrative. Here's a little representation of the temple of Jerusalem. Solomon built one, and then King Herod the Great built an even grander version of the temple. This is King Herod's temple. The rear part of the temple, the aft part, was a special chamber called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, separated by a curtain from the rest of the structure.
How many people could go in there?
Only Israelite priests were allowed to enter. The people themselves stayed in the courtyards outside. Only the Israelite priests and only the high priest went into the Holy of Holies one time a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That's where the Ark was held.
How long do you think it took to construct that? That's a gorgeous facility.
It took decades alone under King Herod the Great to construct this. He built it on an enormous limestone platform that he also had constructed of enormous limestone ashlars. The platform is still there today, even though the temple was completely destroyed by the Romans, and the Dome of the Rock now sits in its place. That platform took a natural hill and turned it into a huge plateau of an area of some 24 football fields. Can you imagine? That's the size of this platform that still adorns the center of Jerusalem to this day. We have a whole group of scholars, being a scholar, known as minimalists. I respect them. They try to suggest that most of these biblical stories were just fabricated. Just basically
great
made
stories.
up.
Yeah.
Great stories written many centuries after the fact, and we should not take them literally. Okay, I get it. I understand that.
Possible,
but when we find uncanny details in the biblical text that could not have been known centuries later. If I were writing a story about, I don't know, China 1,000 years ago, would I know exactly the kind of dress that was worn? Would I know the kind of furnishings?
You'd make it up.
Yeah, I'd make it up.
You'd make it.
And yet to come up with an Ark of the Covenant that looks authentically Egyptian, as if Israelites really were living at some time in ancient Egypt and came out in a great exodus. It's controversial even to say that in academic circles, because so many deny that Israelites ever were in Egypt or there ever was an exodus. But the Ark is actually one of the best proofs that we have.
Now, Rabbi Yehuda Getz, we talked about him at the beginning of the program. Who is he?
Rabbi Yehuda Getz was known as the Rabbi Emeritus of the Western Wall, also called the Wailing Wall. He was a die-hard zealot modern Israeli who had a passion to uncover the whereabouts of the sacred Ark. Now, bear in mind that with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, the eastern half of ancient Jerusalem fell to the Palestinian Arabs.
Sure.
It was actually annexed by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan from 1948, Israel's War of Independence, until 1967, the Six-Day War, when Israel reconquered all of this territory. That's what is so controversial today.
To this day.
But all of Jerusalem suddenly fell to the Israelis. That means the old city, the ancient sites, which were off limits to Israelis, to Jews, frankly, from 1948 to 1967. If you're Jewish, if you're an Israeli and you want to visit the Western Wall and just pray there, well, there's a no man's land you have to cross. You can't get into this area. This was a war zone.
Yeah.
The Israelis retook it. Rabbi Yehuda Getz was there, and he said, I'm living here. I'm living right in the old city.
Is he dead now?
Yes, he is. But he had a passion to actually start digging underneath the rubble of centuries along the Western Wall.
What made him think the Ark was there?
Because if we consider where the temple stood in antiquity, on this enormous limestone platform, all of this area had been covered in centuries of rubble, but Yehuda Getz wanted to dig along underneath the rubble, and he did so. And
they gave him permission to dig?
The Ministry of Religious Affairs gave him permission to do this, and he started tunneling, and he came upon a gate discovered by a British archaeologist back in the 1800s, Charles Warren. They called him the Mole because he was always digging underground. The Mole, I love this guy. And Getz came upon Warren's gate, and he said, you know, if I dig through, if I open a hole essentially in Warren's gate, I can actually follow the ancient tunnels to the area right underneath where the ancient temple stood. And if the Ark of the Covenant is anywhere, I bet it's down there.
Wow, that's fascinating.